Hey, welcome to the Breakaway Podcast. Thanks for joining us in the study of the book of James. We hope you enjoy the talks and stick around for more at the end.
Well, every relationship we enter impacts our personal life. And obviously it varies in degrees. Some impact us more than others. Like you probably didn't find some dynamic, life-changing shift as a result of meeting your mailman. And the truth is, some intersections with professors have been more influential than others. But every relationship we enter into, connection with another human being, leaves an impression, makes a mark. And some of those relationships we enter into touch every single part of our lives. Donna and I are in a place in life where we have kind of two groups of people on either side of us. On one side of us, there's a group of people that are all meeting the one, and they're all getting married, and they're entering into this new union with another human being. On the other side of us, there's two people who've already been married, and they're starting to have kids. And there's a lot of these people. There's babies everywhere. And we've got friends on either side. And on both sides of them, these are people entering into dynamic new relationships. A husband and a wife, a dynamic new relationship. A parent and a child, dynamic relationship. And as they begin, it affects every single area in that person's life. And the truth is, that's not shocking to us. We would expect to hear that. It would be weird not to hear that. It'd be weird if you intersected with a friend who was newly married and said, "Hey, how's the marriage going?" And they go, "Nothing's really changed. It hasn't really affected my life all that much." You would go, "Oh. That's weird, bro. Are y'all going to get some counseling?" Or that would strike you as odd, right? If you met a new parent and said, "What's it like having a baby?" And they go, "I don't think about them that much. And it really hasn't affected the trajectory of my life really at all." You would go, I don't think that's a positive thing. I think you should get some help. That doesn't seem normal. Those kind of relationships should impact your life in dynamic ways. We expect that. If they don't, it's odd. Well, it's the same, and truthfully, this is the whole argument of the book of James that we've been going through this semester. James says if you've had an intersection with the Holy God, if you have met the Lord, that should impact your life. And it's such a significant relationship, it should impact every area of your life. It would be weird if it didn't. It would be weird to be like, yeah, I have entered into a dynamic relationship with the author of all things, the Almighty over the universe. But not much changes really. I'm just kind of doing my life, whatever. It didn't really. That would be odd. It's no, if you've entered into a union with that God, it should impact everything. And that's James' argument. If you've come to know God, have a relationship with Him, it should change the way you talk. It should change the way you treat poor people. It should change the way you handle money. And then tonight he's going to say, and it should change the way you make plans for your life. But what's interesting about James, and you've picked up on it if you've been here with us, James doesn't say that like a counselor, man, if you've had this union, it really should change your life. He says it more like a drill instructor, you've been in this union, change your life, you know what I mean? It's more like, it should be different, adulteress, or else you're evil and demonic, and so James is a little more in our face, all right? And he's going to do that tonight, so I'm just giving you fair warning. So he's going to come after a group of people, and you see it just in the very interesting. He says, "Come now." It's like saying, "Hey, listen here," all right? And he's going to talk a group of people, and he's going to confront a group of people. Now, some of us, we look at this text, and commentators say he's probably talking to businessmen, because it talks about traveling and making a profit, and he's probably talking about believing businessmen. So this is a text for believing Christian businessmen or Christian businesswomen, and that's true, I think so. But the truth is, it's broader than that. He's going to say, I'm talking to anyone, and I'm confronting anybody who would say, today or tomorrow, we'll go to such and such a town, spend a year there, trade, and make a profit. He says, I'm going to confront you. I'm coming after you if you do this. If you say 5 things. Number 1, that you say you're planning to travel, either today or tomorrow. And you say you plan to arrive someplace. You say you plan to spend a certain amount of time there. You dare to say that you're going to do something when you get there. And then you have the audacity to say that you expected to have a certain result. He says if you talk like that, later in the text, he's going to call you arrogant, and then he's going to call you evil. So he's going to say, if you plan on going someplace, doing something, and thinking a certain result is going to happen, you're arrogant. That's James' argument in this text. Feel good about that? So if you've ever said the statement, I'm going to go to A&M, get a degree, and then get a job, James has a problem with you tonight, all right? If you're thinking, well, I'm going to move to Dallas and be a school teacher and love on children, he's going to call you arrogant, all right? If you say, well, I'm thinking of going home for Thanksgiving and hanging out with my family, he's going to call you evil tonight for daring to say that, all right? Which is weird because the truth is all of us make plans. Every single one of us do. And it sounds like he's in our grill about that, right? But every one of us should be like, uh-oh, because I've made some, Like some of you are like, well, I'm planning on graduating. I'm planning on getting a job. I'm planning on getting married. I'm planning on asking her out later, maybe around 10:05. I'm planning on, having a future with children. I'm planning on all this stuff. And now James is going to say, that's wrong. And if you're meeting with God, that should change. You go, so what's going on here? Should I not plan? Is James anti-planning? No, he's not against planning. So is he anti-success? Is that I can plan to go somewhere but not make a profit? If I ever make a profit, I should be like, I'm sorry, I am so sorry, and just give it all away? Is that what he's saying? No, he's not saying that. He's not anti-profit. So what is James mad about? What is he going to accuse you of being arrogant about and being evil because you're doing it? Well, he's not mad at what you rise up to do. He's mad at how you talk about the things you're going to do. And not just how you talk about it. It's not just that his issue is with the words, it's with the perspective behind it. See, James is going to take issue with us if we say, I'm going to go someplace, do some things, do all that. He says, if you talk like that, he says, what's wrong with that is that kind of idea comes forth in a mind and is spoken by a mouth that has failed to do two things. It's failed to take into account a true view of your life, and it's failed to take into account a true view of God. That's his issue. If you're stepping out there and saying, I'm going to go someplace, do something, and have some result, he's going to say, you're arrogant. If you have not done two things. Verse 14, he says, you've not taken a true view of your life into account. And then in verse 15, he says, you don't have a true view of God into account as you've made your plans. That's his issues. So the first issue you see in verse 14, he says, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. He says your first failure, if you're sitting here and you're going, well, I'm going to plan on getting this major, getting this job, going here and having this kind of life. He says if you're doing that kind of thing, you're arrogant. And here's why. He says the first problem is you don't know what tomorrow will bring. He says your failure, if you talk like that, is that you're failing to see yourself rightly. And part of seeing yourself rightly is to understand you're limited. And your knowledge is limited. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You have no idea what's going to come. And that's true. You don't know if you're going to wake up tomorrow, walk out your door, and bump into the one, and meet and marry and have many children. You don't know. That could happen tomorrow, right? Or you could get hit by a bus. And that might change some things. You don't know. And that's what he's going to say. You're limited. So for you to think tomorrow will be like today and I will go on this trajectory, for you to be arrogant enough to think that life is going to go the way you think it's going to go, you have failed to take into account the fact that you don't know. You're limited in your knowledge. You have no idea. But then that's not even his biggest problem with how you see yourself. Really, all that was to build to the next one. And I love the way the sentence runs. It's really all, 13 and 14 is all one big question. And most of the words in it are all the subject. He's talking to you. Let me try to read it how he's saying it. He says, come now, the ones who say today or tomorrow we'll travel into the city and we'll make a year there and trade and gain, yet you do not know the of tomorrow things. Of what sort is your life? And so he says, hey, those of you who make these plans but really don't know what on earth you're talking about, what kind of life do you have anyway? And that's his real question. He says, before you start making plans, pause for a minute and just contemplate the quality of your life. And then he's not even going to give you a lot of time to contemplate it. He's like, let me tell you. He says, you're a mist. You're a mist that appears for a little while and then it vanishes. He says, here's what you need to think about when you start making plans. You need to start thinking about the fact that you're like smoke. And he says, you're like smoke that appears, literally like it comes into the light and you see it for a second. And then he says it's destroyed. It vanishes. He says, before you start making plans, you're going to plan wrong if you don't take into account the fact that you're not here long. You don't last long. There's a fragility to you. And you have to keep that in mind as you're making your plans. And the truth is, it's a reality, but it's a reality not many of us think of. That the truth is, so much of what we build fades. It does. And if you don't believe me, just think back to high school, right? Some of you built an empire in high school, all right? I mean, you climbed to the highest mountains, right? I mean, you had the social sphere all set. You had the letter jacket on. You had all the different patches on it that were just badges of honor. And it's over. Nobody cares, right? And some of you are still processing that, all right? I mean, like you've gotten here and you're just like, it's all gone. It's a waste. And you're in sackcloth and ashes going, why, God, all right? Because you built something you loved and it's gone, right? I mean, I remember for me, we were looking at old pictures of back when I went to college and when I went to Breakaway and the people leading on stage. There were girls leading worship on stage and they were in long denim skirts and like puffy vests that were sewn and big hair, and I remember when I was there, that looked so normal. And now we were like, if they got on stage like that, people thought it was like a joke, like Halloween or something. And what's scary is that's going to happen to you. You know that, right? Like in 4 or 5 years, you're going to look back in college and go, hey, what were we thinking? That is an atrocious color, all right? And like, you're going to look and realize what you thought was awesome in a couple years, nobody's going to care. And the truth is, you can look at your own life and just go, man, we build stuff and it fades fast. It goes away. Some of you as seniors already know that. You spent college building a social network, all your groups of friends, somewhere to go every Thursday night, Friday night. Now you're a senior. Or even more painful, like a 5th-year senior. And then you look around and you go, who are all these children? Where did all my friends go? And then you go, it's not that I've left college. My college experience has left me, all right? And you realize things fade, they change. And the reality is it's the same for your life. He says your life is going to fade. But what happens to a lot of us is we lose perspective of that. We get so fixed on what we're going to do. I'm going to go to this city and trade and make money and make a profit. We get so locked into that, we don't stop to think about our transient nature. And so many of us do it. We got into college and we're thrilled to get in college. Now we're picking a major so we can get a job, so we can make money, so we can get married, so we can buy a house, so we can have kids, so they can get an education, so they can get a job, so they can make money, and so they can buy a house, and so they can have kids, so their kids can get an education and buy a house. And we're on this trail. We think that's awesome. And then you step back and you go, wait a minute. James is going, hold on. All of you are going to die. And you need to ask the question, what was the point of all that? And some of us, we get so locked into our narrow little worlds, we miss out on what this world is about. And he says, don't do that. Don't start making all your plans to stop and think for a minute. You're not going to be here long. Because if you do that, there's a good chance you're going to miss what life is really about. And so Jonathan Edwards was wise when he was in his 20s and wrote his resolution. He said, resolve to think often of my death and the common circumstances that attend death. And some of you think, boy, that's really morbid, right? But he's saying it's good to think about the end of your life. The Puritans used to do that. Cemeteries in the Puritan towns in America, they put the cemetery in the center of the town so that wherever you went in town, you would see the headstones of your friends and realize your life isn't going to last long, right? Nowadays, where are the cemeteries? You don't even know, do you? We hide them. We hide them from ourselves. We know where the malls are. And so we just buy, and it's now, and it's right now, and we forget that, no, there's a later, and that later is we're not going to be here. Right? The death rate hasn't changed. It's still 1 per person. We're all leaving. And the truth is, and I'll say this, and then I'll quit belaboring this point, and it's this. I'll tell you, it's one thing why I love Silver Taps, which is tonight, by the way. I love that at A&M we don't do that. I mean, we have once a month, we have a moment where we honor those who have fallen that month, our Aggies who have died. And you sit out there and you honor them, you honor their families by attending, and so I hope you all go. But then it also gives you a moment to contemplate life and the brevity of it. That you sit there and you go, one day those bugles will play for me. And what can be said about my life? That's the point of thinking about it. It's not just to think about death, to obsess about death. You think about the fact that you're going to die. Why? So that it will impact how you live. So that you can look and go, wait a minute. And James is getting all this from his brother, by the way, Jesus. Luke chapter 12, Jesus tells the story of a guy who spent all his time building up his money and buying his barns and says, I will be comfortable for years to come. And Jesus said, you fool, tonight your soul will be required of you. And some of you, you're chasing a little thing that if you died tonight, you would be a fool because you've missed so much of what life is about. James says, don't do that. Don't start making plans without keeping in mind that you won't be here long. Let that reality inform what you prioritize. Right? Now, the truth is, if we just stopped there, and this was the end of the talk, this would not have been a distinctively Christian talk, right? Anyone could say this, all right? All I could have done is just shown you the bucket list, all right? And we would all gotten the same point, or just played, I hope you dance, and you all would have cried and be like, I will dance, all right? And it would have been the same thing. It's not distinctively Christian yet, but James isn't done. He's going to say in verse 15, instead, you ought to say, those of you who say, I'm going to get this major and get this job and go this place. He goes, don't say that anymore. He says, instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. He says, what you need to do is, one, you need to see yourself rightly, that you don't last long. And number two, you need to see God rightly. You need to look at the Lord. And you need to know two things about him. Number one, it's the Lord who wills, and it's his will that determines whether or not we live. Do you see that? The Lord determines if I live. It's his determination if I continue to exist. That's God's duty, and that's his prerogative. And so you have no control over when you will live or when you will die. You don't. But the Lord does. It's his decision. When he's ready to stop letting your molecules cohere, he will stop. If he wants you to keep living, he will let you keep living. But that's his call. That's completely his call. I have a friend who's my age that got cancer and had to deal with that. Hey, God might have just called my number up, and I'm here, and I'm not that old. And he had to think about that. God took that cancer away. And so he's been given more time. But I guarantee you, it's informed the way he lives his life to look and go, okay, I get it, God. You run the show. And you determine whether I live or die. And that's important to remember as you walk through life. It's the Lord's will that determines whether or not I live. And not just whether or not I live. Look what he says. And if the Lord wills, we will do this or that. He says the Lord not only determines whether or not you continue to exist, he determines what you do while you exist. Like if you've got plans of something you're going to accomplish, you will accomplish that only by God's leave, whether or not he chooses to let you do that. You don't have enough control to determine, I'm going to get this job and build this country or this company. Maybe if God lets you, but not on your own. It's his prerogative. The Lord wills if you continue to live and you do this or that. It's his prerogative. Right? And that's sobering. I'll tell you, that's something I learned early on here. The one that God lets me live and then God lets me do this or that. When I showed up at Breakaway, it took my wife and I like 9 months to decide to come to Breakaway. It was very stressful to decide. I was in the middle of grad school. I'm like, do I just quit and move down there? Do I move back to Bryan College Station? You know, like, I don't know how many of you think, like, when you graduate, I'll be back, BCS. I never thought that. I thought I was gone. And I'm like, should I move back? And then should I run this thing? Can I even do it? Is that what God wants for me? And there was all these question marks. I'm like, I don't know. And finally we just prayed and we said, yeah, let's do it. And so we decided to move here, and we thought, you know what, we're not going to do it halfway. We're going to move here. So we bought a house. We're like, we're not going to rent and kind of see how it goes. We're all in. We're going to buy earth in Bryan. It's like, I live here. This is my Bryan soil. And we just we did it. We bought a house, all right? And then I remember showing up my first day in my office, walking in, and they handed me a financial statements for Breakaway. And there was a column with how much we owed. And there was a column with how much we had. And how much we had was far smaller than how much we owed. And I looked at that and I was like, well, that can't be good. And I remember the first thing I thought was, that would have been a good question to ask in the interview. And so I called the former director, because I remembered when I went to Breakaway, he used to say, hey, Breakaway's only 1 month away from bankruptcy every month. And I said, okay. And so I called him and I said, hey, is that just where we are? I read him the numbers and I said, are these numbers, we're just 1 month away from bankruptcy? And he goes, no, I think those numbers are historic. And I said, okay, I'm just checking. Are you telling me I'm at a historically low point? Like I'm today at the lowest financial point in Breakaway history right now? And he's like, yes, that's right. He's like, okay, good. Just wanted to know where I was. So that would have been great to know before I signed on to buy a house, you know? But, okay, so I got done. And I remember sitting there at my desk and was like, well, this was fantastic. I just signed on to be the captain of the Titanic, you know, like and I thought, well, okay. And I realized at that moment, I don't have any money. I don't know anybody who has any money. There's no one I can call and just be like, hey, sugar daddy, will you send me I don't know one. So I got to a place where I said, I'm out of luck, man. I don't know what to do. I am out of control. I thought I was going to do this, but it doesn't look like it's happening. And so I remember I came to our team leaders, one of our earliest team leader meetings. I gathered around. I'm like, hey, it's great to be you guys director. I just want you to know this whole ship's going down, people. Seriously, we're all going to die. You know, just kind of like, hey, I don't know what's going to happen. And so I just told them, hey, I don't know if you guys know what fasting is. That's where you go without food and beg God to do something. And we're going to do that. We're all going to go without food and pray for God's mercy. All right. And we did that. And this group of college students said, hey, we're going to pray. And we realized it's going to be God because it's not us. And that next month, we had the largest donation Breakaway's ever had, a series of donations, the biggest month of donations Breakaway's ever had. And it was like a signal. God said, no, you're going to do this. But I remember when I sat there, I just thought, okay, God, now why did you do that? You know, like, did you just want to stress me out? Was that kind of fun? Like, let's see what he does. You know, like, let's give him a little gray hair on the edges. I don't think he has enough, you know? Maybe give him heart trouble. I don't know. It's just for fun. And then I thought, no, you know what he wanted to do? He wanted to show me this. Hey, it's my call whether you do this or that. And you thought you were going to do this, and maybe you won't. And I thought, I was like, okay, maybe I'll be doing that from now on. But he said, no, I want you doing this. I just want you to know that I'm the one who determines that. And some of you, you know what? You've got your plan. You think, I'm going to do this. I'm smart enough. I've got the skills. I'm going to go build this. My dad's already got the job waiting for me, or this company's going to hire me. This is going to happen, and this is going to do it. Hey, God gave you the ability you have to read, think, walk, talk, and he causes your molecules to cohere. You're alive because he wants you to be, and you'll do whatever he wants you to do. And it's good to remember that. It's good to think like that. It's his will if we live and do this or that. But he says, if you're not putting God into the equation, he says, you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. He says, if you're not thinking about him as you make your plans, that's evil. I want to read you a story, and we're about to close. And don't worry, I'll get us out on time for Silver Tabs. But it's from a book called The Faith of the American Soldier. And it says, thickly muscled and plastered with tattoos, McKay is a smaller, meaner-looking version of Arnold Schwarzenegger. If the artwork needled into his skin is any guide, he spent his life among the bad and the bold, answering his thirst for women in danger. His credo adorns his left arm, and then the quote, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for I am the baddest warrior in the valley. McKay tells everyone who will listen that he's in Iraq because when the going gets tough, the tough go Marine. He joined up after high school in L.A. because he wanted to experience Fear Factor on Stun, a reference to the popular television show in which contestants confront their fear to win money. Nicknamed Sparky by the other men of the platoon because he's short and squat like a spark plug, McKay sees life as a series of challenges to his personal toughness. He doesn't fight for nation or ideals. He suspects that the politicians who sent him to Iraq are no less corrupt than the dealers on the streets of L.A., and he doesn't care. He's here to prove himself and return home as, and I quote, bad as any mother's son who ever walked on the earth. McKay's only real friend is a black kid the men called Dog Man. He is the cool everyone wants to be. A grooving, laughing, tough kid from the street of Detroit who's as good a Marine as any man in the platoon. And for some reason that no one can explain, McKay loves him. Perhaps their friendship started with Dog Man showed he wasn't afraid of McKay. Or perhaps it happened when McKay was in a bad mood in the barracks one evening, but Dog Man pulled him up for a dance to an Outkast tune anyway. McKay couldn't stay mad, and everybody shouted rowdy cheers as they did their thing. Something started that night, and everybody knows McKay and Dog Man are, quote, tight, and that McKay would kill a man who messed with that skinny, smiling black kid. Then it happened. One night, McKay and Dog Man were keeping an eye on the entrance to a house with 5 other Marines while a second squad entered from the rear. The night was quiet. Men joked and cussed, never taking their eyes from the gated entrance to the house across the street. Dog Man was just a few feet behind McKay and was just telling him how stupid white boys from L.A. are when the mortar round hit him. It landed behind Dog Man and nearly vaporized him, spraying the now unrecognizable matter of his body all over McKay. It's a week later now. McKay is slumped over coffee at the camp watering hole, the fire and anger gone from his chiseled face. He grieves for his friend, but there's something more. Death, which has always seemed at bay from his strong, arrogant life, is now as close as his breath. He will end. Someday, somehow, he will end. Just as Dog Man left this life, so will McKay, and he knows it now. This body he has worked so hard to craft, this persona he has come to love so much, it will end, and probably in a bloody crush here in Iraq. Death is asking Darren McKay who he is and what he believes, and he does not know. Dog Man was the best of us, McKay says quietly, refusing to tear, and he went in an instant. I probably will too. But I wish I knew something about what's on the other side. I wish I believed something or I'd done something that makes it all worthwhile. I hate the thought of dying, but I hate the thought of dying empty most of all. It's terrible to see a friend die, and I'm not going to presume to speculate on why God chose to do it that way that night. But it's good to think of the reality that we all will. And it's good to let that reality push us where it pushed McKay, to contemplate what's on the other side. It's good to think the question, if my life's going to end, what is my life about? And is there a bigger meaning? And the truth is, James gives us an answer. If the Lord wills, you will live and do this or that. And for many of us, that can sound terrible. We go, well, that just sounds oppressive. But the truth is, what's beautiful is James doesn't just say, well, God will determine. He doesn't use a generic term. The truth is, his culture did that. He says, the Lord determines. The Lord determines who will live and who does this or that. And he points to a name that he had pointed out at the beginning of the book of James. The Lord is the person Jesus Christ. The answer that McKay is missing, and I hope you won't miss, is there is a Lord who causes your molecules to cohere and who runs the whole universe by the word of his power. It is the Lord. It is the Lord Jesus Christ. And he will determine what you do, and he will determine when you cease doing anything. And that can sound like really bad news until you grab the idea that the Lord is a great leader. See, it sounds oppressive to go, someone else is going to control my life and I don't have any say on where it's going to go. That sounds awful. It does sound awful, unless you absolutely trust that leader. In preparation for this talk, I watched Band of Brothers, which I think is good preparation for just about anything, to be quite honest with you, and would recommend it to any of you. But there's a part in Band of Brothers where it recalls at the end of the Battle of Bastogne, the 101st is camped outside of Foy, or Foy, depending on how you want to pronounce it, I don't know. And they were called to take the city. The problem was they had a lieutenant guiding them who was incompetent and didn't care about them. And it was very scary to see someone who didn't care about the mission they were on and didn't care about them as people leading them into battle. And as he led them in, he made decisions that was causing them to die needlessly, and it was bad. And then their commanding officer did something brilliant. He replaced that incompetent and uncaring lieutenant with a different one, Lieutenant Spears. And Spears went charging into the battle alone across an open field. He said not only were the Germans firing machine guns at him, at one time they shot at him with an 88, a huge gun. And he said that impressed him, that they would fire such a large weapon at just one single man. And just the fact that he was paused to think he was impressed by that as he ran through an open field towards gunfire tells you what an odd man he was. But he ran full force towards those men, and he started barking orders of how they were going to accomplish that mission. And then he put them in a place where they could succeed. And the most interesting thing they said about that moment was he told them the battle plan, and then he said, is everyone ready? Follow me. And then he looked up and he charged towards the Germans. And they said what was interesting about that moment is he never looked behind his shoulder to see if we were following him. He just ran out there ahead of us, willing to take the hit for us. And all of us, when we saw that guy willing to lay his life down for us, we gladly followed him. And the truth is, James will say, the guy who's determining whether or not you live and what you do is the guy who stood up in front of you. He charged into the bullets for you. He didn't just risk his life, he cost his life. And that's the guy you follow. See, the Lord is the person Jesus Christ, who didn't just reign up in heaven as we deal with our problems on earth. He stepped into our problems. He took on the very form of a man. And then he said, there is a mission on this planet bigger than making money. The mission is to see all this sin, all this darkness that's corrupting you and destroying your lives. He says it's to see that beat back and the kingdom of God return to this planet. And he didn't just say, so you guys do it. Go be good people and try to make the world peaceful. He said, follow me. And he stepped out towards the enemy. He stepped out towards sin. And he took all the penalty of our sin, our sickness, onto himself. He took the hit for us, and he died from it. And then he rose from the dead, and he said, I have beat death, and now I'm calling others to join me, to forsake sin, and through me, to come into a right relationship with God. And then he looks at his children and say, and you come with me. You follow me. You run in the path I have for you. Will there be pain in it? Sure. But I can know that it'll be no more pain than he endured. And it will be a path that has my best interests in mind. He cares for me. And it has the great mission in mind, bigger than just making money, the mission of seeing human beings come to know God again. That's who we're following. It's the Lord who wills, not just some random deity who doesn't care. It's the Lord who came and lived and died for our rescue and will bring us into glory with him. And so if you don't know him, your reason you exist is you are made by him and for him. And I would pray that even tonight you would cry out to the Lord Jesus Christ, that you would enter into a relationship with him and then walk with him for a lifetime. And then for the rest of us, make your plans. Get your degree. Go get a job. Get married. But say, if the Lord wills, I will do this or that, and I will live.
Well, thanks for being here with us on this part of the podcast. And Ben, last night we were in Rudder Auditorium again, and our friend Aaron Ivey came into town and led worship for us. And he's been here before, earlier in the semester when we were at Kylefield. But last night was just an amazing time of worship. Just a powerful, 20, 30 minutes of singing with their band leading us.
Well, they're just tremendous leaders, and I love them because they're musically very talented, but then there's just this really honest heart of wanting to worship the Lord, and so that's very articulate. Like when they talk to students, they're not just saying things to fill up space. It's very like, here's our heartfelt desire of how you respond as we sing this together. And then when they lead it, you can tell they're worshiping. And then when you get to know the guys, all that, you're like, yeah, they're not just doing this as a gig. Like, this is what God's built them to do. And it is always fun to have them leading. And they're very passionate about it and very energetic about it, and in a way that's conducive to worship and no way distracting. They're just excited about worshiping, and you can tell. And it was a lot of fun to have them.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to kind of, bring them on the podcast at some point and talk with them and get to know them a little better, because, you've done a lot of camps and things in the past with them. And, I've known Aaron for a while too, but it's interesting, we bring people in that we know, that we trust their heart and leadership of worship, but people out there don't really have a clue kind of who they are and what they're about. And that makes up them as a leader and as a person who, does what they do. So it'd be good to bring them on at some point.
Totally.
Yeah. So last night you were, in the 4th chapter of the book of James, and you got us to the end of that chapter, but then you really weren't able to kind of wrap up the last verse.
Yeah. Well, the good news is if you're here, you just listen to the talk, so I don't have to recap all that. But we didn't get to, he closes out by saying, as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. And then he says, so whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. And that's how he closes out that section. And it almost, like a lot of times in James, it almost feels like kind of this sudden swerve to the right where you're like, huh? Like, how does that connect? And a lot of people read that verse and they quote it as a more universal verse talking about the sins of omission, which if you're not familiar with that language, people say there's 2 kinds of sins. Sins of commission, like I committed a sin, I did an act that is evil, and sins of omission would be I failed to act when there was something there was someone in need and I did nothing, and we actually have laws in our country about sins of omission, but anyway, so he says, whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. That's what and so some people just see that generally of going, okay, if there's something that's good to do and you fail to do it, then that's a failure. That counts as a sin, and that's a true statement. That is a true reality. The Bible sees that. There are sins of omission. That's a legitimate thing. I think in this verse, you have to see, how does it link to the context, though? Because it does. He unpacks this deal about don't just make your plans and be flippant about the fact that there's a God who rules this world and has a way he wants to do things. If you're just making your plans your way, he's going to say that's boasting and that's evil. You should be saying, if the Lord wills, I live and I'll do this and that. You should have that humility in your heart, and then it should come out in the way you talk about your life. And then he says, so, which is kind of a milder term of therefore. He's like, therefore, whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him is sin. I think what he's saying there is, that you're supposed to see your life as under the Lord, and you shouldn't just be launching out to do your plans your way and talking about it as if it's going to happen. You should be more humble than that. You should go, wait a minute, I'm not in control. God's in control, and he decides if I live. He decides what I accomplish, and that humility should totally inform the way I live. And then I think he's closing out his argument and saying, and so if you fail to do that, if you fail to take this message deeply into your heart and drill it into your heart and let that be the well from which your words come, then you're sinning. So I think it connects directly to that context. And it's just sort of an added punctuation mark on what we talked about. You should be humble when you talk about your plans. It's okay to plan. It's okay to want to succeed, but it should be under the sovereign rule of God, and that humility should be pervasive in the way I think and the way I talk. So I think that's where that was going. So for the people who felt unsettled about the lack of verse 17, there it is.
That's okay. So we'll be, continuing to go through the book of James for the rest of the semester, basically. And we've only got 4 more left, 4 more breakaways.
That's right.
So, this has already just flown by, and we are making plans currently to kind of do what we like to call our Go Missions Conference, which is really just a time for students to connect with opportunities of mission and organizations and agencies that spread the gospel around the world. And we love to gather friends and also people that will set up tables and booths and kind of say, hey, come meet us, come find out about what we're about. So we're going to be doing that in a few weeks. At Central Baptist Church, and we've already talked about it on this podcast, but we wanted just to kind of remind people again, that this is happening, and that if they can make it, we'd love to see them at 6:30. Doors open, and then we do some breakout sessions. And I think next week on the podcast, we're going to kind of go into detail a little bit about some of those breakouts and what that'll look like. And so, tune in next week too, to kind of find out exactly the opportunities that'll be there for people. And you can already begin praying and thinking about, hey, what breakout sessions would I like to go to, and what am I interested in finding out about?
Totally. Well, and you're right. I mean, it's winding down. There's only 4 breakaways left. We'll be in James next week, have Go Missions, and there's a break for Thanksgiving. And then we have 2 afterwards at the beginning of December, and that's it. So the semester has flown by, man. And
so speaking of the break, I think everybody who's listening would love to know, what are you doing over the break, Ben? Do you just go and sleep for 6 weeks or 4 months, or what do you do?
I'd like to. We do breakaway proper does not meet over the break. Obviously students vacate this town, and so we take a break from meeting, and we come back the first week of school in January. But there is something exciting that's happening over the break that we will be a part of. And we mentioned this last night, which is why we mention it now, is, we get just inundated with requests to promote different organizations and ministries at Breakaway. And it's tough because there's so many good ones and so many great things going on. So we have ways we do it. We put up slides on the screen and people can see what's going on. We have an information table. And so we're always sort of marketing for other ministries that we believe in what they're doing and are on board with that. And we love doing that. There's so many wonderful camps that recruit at A&M, and there's just amazing things going on around here. There's one ministry that we do kind of talk about verbally, and the reason we do is because Breakaway's history is so intertwined with theirs, and that is Passion conferences. When Breakaway started 20 years ago, it was a handful of college kids suddenly found themselves starting a little Bible study that became a big Bible study, and it was overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And so they went out searching for help, and they went to Waco because there was a ministry in Waco that was rocking along serving college students, and it was led by Louis Giglio. And so Louis was sort of a source of wisdom to Greg and the early guys at Breakaway at its very inception. And then for me, when I hit college, I attended Passion's first conference, which was led by Louis, and it was just a very powerful experience for me to be a part of that. And I would say the ministry that they've guided has significantly influenced me as a minister. And so there's always been a history with Breakaway and Passion, and there will be over the break. I'll be at Passion leading a community group, speaking at a breakout session, and just our team will be up there serving in different capacities. And we mentioned it to our students because it's a conference for college students, and it's at the college break, and it's just aimed at their life, but it's college students from all over the country and even from all over the world. So we're excited about that conference. We felt comfortable talking about it because of our connection with them historically, and then even today. And so we just commended that to students. Hey, whatever you're doing over the break, some of you may already have plans, but if you don't, these will be powerful days in Atlanta, the January 2nd through 5th, of meeting together and listening to teaching, worshiping together, processing in groups together, and just kind of meeting with the Lord together with college students from around the country. So it's an exciting thing, and hopefully some Aggies will turn out and represent. So anyway.
Yeah, and I know that last night you said people could go and register for the conference and kind of get that set, because they have potential of filling up. And it is in Atlanta, so it's a little bit of a journey, but what college students don't like road trips? I mean, come on. So if you want to find out more about Passion and like the 2010 conference at the beginning of the new year, you can go to 268generation.com and just check out their website to find out all like kind of the details about it. So yeah, go to 268generation.com and find out more about the Passion Conference. But we're going to leave you now and look forward to being with you next week. So thanks so much for joining us. Ben, thank you for getting up early this morning and dusting off the cobwebs of your sleepy eyes. I don't know what that means. So we'll see you soon. Thanks.
See ya.